Nobody makes fun of me and gets away with it.
So, it seems South Park has really taken the world by storm again with their insane episode where they completely ridiculed Donald Trump and also put a giant target on the back of their parent company, Paramount. With this episode currently making waves over every corner of the internet and every news site, this has had a lot of fans of the show reflecting on some of the show's most memorable moments over the nearly 30 years that it's been on the air. Pretty much everything has been flying around during this time of a South Park renaissance as faithful fans rejoice in a new season of the show being on the air. Discussions have emerged about the best episodes of the show and the worst episodes of the show. However, one thing in particular surprisingly hasn't come up during this glorious time of South Park resurgence, and that's the fact that South Park actually has really good neurodivergent representation.
What?
Yes, surprisingly, out of all the shows, South Park has actually had some of the most surprisingly insightful and nuanced neurodivergent and disability representation in popular media. For a show known for pretty much satirizing every single aspect of humanity, South Park has actually done a lot of good for both neurodivergent and disability representation, as wild as that is. They've especially done a lot of good work for conditions that aren't as well known about, such as Tourette's, which South Park, of all things, actually had a very respectful episode talking about. And they have great autistic coded characters like Kenny, who a lot of autistic people tend to resonate with, and a lot of great disabled representation like Jimmy and Timmy as well. Especially with the nature of a show like South Park, it actually really works in these characters' favor since it helps them not feel infantilized whatsoever, which is really a trap that a lot of other media falls into when it comes to autistic coded or autistic characters. So today, I want to talk about the different neurodivergent representation that's found in South Park, why it's actually really good, and what other pieces of media should learn from South Park when representing disabilities and neurodivergencies overall. To start, let's look at the aforementioned Tourette's episode and talk about how that actually ended up breaking down a lot of stereotypes surrounding Tourette's when it came out, and also ended up being a really insightful piece of media covering it overall. This episode premiered during the show's 11th season and was called La Petite Tourette. It centers on Cartman just so happening to stumble across a kid in a toy store who has Tourette syndrome, something Cartman has never heard of before. The idea of Tourette's completely enraptures Cartman, and of course, being the kind of person he is, he immediately decides after hearing about this mental condition he should pretend he has it, so he can get away with saying whatever he wants with no repercussions whatsoever. Wow, a very Cartman thing to do. But unfortunately for Cartman, he didn't count on the fact that him pretending to have Tourette's so he could get away with saying whatever he wanted would actually cause him to actually have Tourette's for real.
What I meant to say was ass licker cumballs. And I'm secretly in love with Patty Nelson. Ew.
Yes, this is a real thing in the episode, and it's amazing the comeuppance here.
I just want to thank everyone for coming. My cousin and I touched Wiener. Winter is a cold time of year.
But I think the thing that really makes this episode is that they actually bother to really thoroughly explain what Tourette's is and break down a lot of the stereotypes that are associated with it. Prior to the episode itself actually airing, when South Park did announce they were going to do an episode on Tourette's for their 11th season, the Tourette's Association of America, which at the time was just called the Tourette Syndrome Association, ended up speaking out and objecting to South Park covering Tourette syndrome since they fully expected it to be offensive and insensitive to people with Tourette's. However, after the episode actually aired, the Tourette's Association wound up retracting their statement and actually said the episode was well researched and ended up praising it. In particular, they highlighted a moment where Kyle's taken to a Tourette's awareness group to learn more about what Tourette's truly is.
Tourette's is like a cough or a sneeze. It isn't contagious like some people think.
A lot of people with Tourette's have different tics. My tic is that I have to bend my neck and snap my fingers.
Tourette's is honestly one of the most misunderstood mental conditions out there. It's generally seen as a condition that causes people that are affected by it to involuntarily curse at any given moment, but this isn't really true. Just like any neurodivergency, there's a lot more to it, and there's a wider spectrum of Tourette's overall. This episode actually ends up highlighting this with all the kids that Kyle ends up in the group with. Each of them has an uncontrollable tic that they can't help doing, and not all of them are cursing. Most of them are actually some of the more common symptoms of Tourette's. Things like snapping your fingers or moving your neck in a certain way or cracking your knuckles are way more common symptoms of Tourette's than just cursing randomly. And thankfully, that's actually shown really well with these children. And of course, Cartman does pretend like he has Tourette's, since on the surface, it seems like an easy out for him to say whatever he wants with no repercussions, but the reality quickly sets in there too. Pretty soon, he's saying things he doesn't want to say at all in public randomly just because he finally got Tourette's for real. The irony is absolutely delicious here. And really, that's kind of just the reality of having Tourette's overall. It's not a fun condition whatsoever, although really, no mental condition is truly fun anyway.
You want to know about fun? Going to public places knowing you're gonna make a fool of yourself. Embarrass your parents. My dad finally couldn't take it anymore. He divorced my mom, said he'd still be around. The worst part is I know how lonely my mom is. A lot of times I know she'd be better off if I was dead.
So ultimately, Cartman is actually punished for thinking this way, and really, the audience is shown what Tourette's is in a really realistic light in this episode. This is really the first time that Tourette's was actually properly showcased to people in any sort of form of mainstream media, which is a really good thing. And ultimately, because of this episode, a lot more real conversations about Tourette's ultimately ended up happening, and a lot more people understood that it's a huge spectrum. This episode ultimately really did aid a lot in breaking down tons of harmful stereotypes surrounding Tourette's, so I think it's really commendable for that. Thomas, the main kid with Tourette's in this episode, talks about how it's a curse for him and how he doesn't even like going into the grocery store with his mom because he knows he'll get embarrassed.
Mom, let's just go.
People with Tourette's can't control certain tics. It's like a sneeze.
Mom, can we just go home, please?
It's okay, Thomas. They understand.
I want to go.
Poor kid. Yeah.
And he doesn't like other people knowing he has Tourette's because he doesn't like feeling pitied by them or ostracized. Honestly, this especially is a really relatable thing for me, and I imagine a lot of other neurodivergent people as well, because honestly, for a long time, I didn't like telling people I was autistic because of this. In a lot of situations, when a neurotypical person knows that another person is autistic, they can actually form a sort of subconscious bias towards that person, and whether intentional or not, may subconsciously ostracize them from other people that they know that are neurotypical. Like I said before, this isn't necessarily always an intentional thing, although it definitely can be. But I know for me personally, and I've had other autistic friends that I've talked to about this before that have had similar experiences. But even if someone just simply knows that you're on the autism spectrum, they may unintentionally treat you differently than they would any other person. For those in the spectrum with lesser support needs who might be self-sufficient or pay their own rent or live independently like I do myself, this can actually come off as kind of infantilizing and like you're not really being taken seriously in that situation. I know for me personally, and a lot of other autistic people I've talked to, this is definitely something we've all gone through before. Obviously, with my job description being content creator, and a lot of my content revolving around educating people about autism, this of course sometimes can result in this kind of behavior at different creator meetups that I've been to, but overall I'd say the reception has been pretty positive to the autism content I do here, and ultimately I'd say I'm a lot more confident about being open about being autistic than I used to be for sure. But it's definitely because of stuff like this that I really relate to Thomas in this episode and how he doesn't want anyone to know that he has Tourette's and he doesn't like being pitied or infantilized for it. Like at the start of the episode where his mom and him are in the toy store and his mom is explaining to other people around them about his tics and he just runs away because he can't handle it. He doesn't like being gawked at or put on some pitiable pedestal. And honestly, I don't really blame him because I've been in a lot of uncomfortable situations like that before myself, and I know a lot of other autistic friends that have expressed the same sentiments. And honestly, I'd say it's probably even worse for someone with Tourette's because even to this day, that is still one of the most misunderstood mental conditions ever, probably. I would say for something like autism, there's definitely been a lot more knowledge and awareness spread on what that really is over the past few years, but for something like Tourette, it's far much more of an uphill battle. But I really do commend South Park for probably putting what is the best representation of Tourette's out there in popular media and sparking those conversations that needed to be had. Especially with a show like South Park, it ended up educating a lot more people on what Tourette's really is in a very clever way than could have probably been done otherwise. But interestingly enough, South Park hasn't just brought a realistic and grounded approach to people with Tourette syndrome, they've actually also done exactly the same thing for crippled people too. Enter Jimmy and Timmy, two crippled kids who very quickly became fan favorite characters upon their respective introductions to the show due to them being portrayed in a way that didn't infantilize them, much like the Tourette situation. Timmy was technically the first of these crippled kids to be introduced in the episode The Tooth Fairy's Tits 2000. But it was really in Timmy 2000 later in that season that he really got to shine. In this episode, Timmy actually becomes the frontrunner for a band called Timmy and the Lords of the Underworld that becomes very popular. However, while a lot of people come to see Timmy and his band perform, for some reason some people in the crowd seem to think that everybody is laughing at him.
That was awesome! Yeah, Timmy rules.
Boys, you shouldn't laugh at him. He's handicapped.
But he's funny.
How would you like to be handicapped? Do you think that would be funny? You're making him feel bad.
He looks pretty happy to me.
Oh, you people make me sick.
I think this is actually really interesting because this is sort of satirizing the kind of people who will get mad at any sort of positive response to a disabled person, thinking it's just mocking them. The reality here is everybody's cheering with Timmy and laughing with him. Nobody's laughing at him. But unfortunately, it seems like these people don't quite get that, and it's kind of funny to be honest. The thing I like about the crowd cheering and laughing with Timmy is that they treat him like a real character. One of the coolest parts about the disabled characters in South Park is that they're never treated like anything lesser than the other characters around them. Funny enough, they're always actually treated as equals by their peers, which is honestly really great. They're not treated like pure saints who can't ever do anything wrong, or they're not treated like dumb fools who always mess up everything either. They're treated like real people with real human flaws, and that's just kind of really nice to see in anything. A lot of the times with disability representation, you almost always get either end of the extreme there, and nothing really in between, or nothing really that human feeling. South Park, however, actually ends up being surprisingly progressive in this regard and just treats its disabled characters like real people, which they should be treated like. Unfortunately, someone else in this episode doesn't want Timmy to be quote-unquote laughed at, and that's none other than Phil Collins of all people.
Think it's a horrible tragedy, isn't it? I mean, people aren't gonna see Timmy for his musical skills. They're laughing at him, and I think you shouldn't laugh at people with disabilities.
So this is an interesting thing. Matt and Trey were actually really intent on ribbing Phil Collins in this episode since the year prior he'd actually won the Oscar for Best Song. That, of course, was for You'll Be in My Heart from the Disney film Tarzan, which, to his credit, is a great song, and that entire soundtrack is a banger. Seriously, there's often a lot of days where I'll just binge that entire soundtrack, because it's just so good. But the interesting thing about this is, at the time, Matt and Trey were actually also in the runnings to win Best Original Song at the Oscar for Blame Canada from the South Park movie. Admittedly, they expected not to win it all, since the lineup was pretty stacked, with You'll Be in My Heart, Save Me from Magnolia, When She Loved Me from Toy Story 2, and Music of My Heart from Music of the Heart. So of course Matt and Trey have gone on record saying they didn't expect to win the Oscar for Best Original Song at all for Blame Canada, but they didn't expect to lose to Phil Collins of all people. So of course throughout this entire episode they ruthlessly make fun of Phil Collins in typical South Park fashion, and of course he's holding an Oscar this whole time. He's holding it throughout this entire episode. Very subtle, guys. But of course, Phil Collins is also meant to represent the kind of people who can't really see that people are laughing with Timmy, not laughing at him. And also, really, he's just jealous that Timmy is now frontlining Lollapalooza instead of him. So he tries to get Timmy's band to break up, and also tries to convince a bunch of Ritalin-induced kids that his music isn't actually boring, which, of course, ultimately fails.
Wait a minute. Phil Collins sucks ass.
Yeah! What the hell were we thinking?
Boo!
The kids just like Timmy for being Timmy and just treat him like a real person. That's honestly a really great thing throughout this entire episode. This episode ultimately has a really nice message in my opinion. Timmy is just happy doing what he's doing here, and that kids are happy with Timmy. There's really nothing wrong with that.
No, you see, we learned something today. Yeah, sure, we laughed at Timmy, but what's wrong with laughter? Just because we laugh at something doesn't mean we don't care about it. Timmy made us smile, and playing made Timmy smile. So where was the harm in that?
It's not portrayed as infantilizing whatsoever, and it's honestly a really nice breath of fresh air. Now that brings us to the other crippled character in South Park, that being Jimmy, who first appeared in the episode Cripple Fight. In this episode, Jimmy is actually introduced as Timmy's counterpart and is a disabled character that wants to be a stand-up comedian. He attends different scout meetings for the Boy Scouts of South Park and also performs his stand-up routine to them. And to this, he's actually praised by all the Boy Scouts, but unfortunately Timmy is pretty annoyed because he's also disabled and he was never praised or given special treatment. Which, of course, is exactly what's happening to Jimmy here, and this also leads to the titular cripple fight in this episode. But again, also like Timmy, Jimmy also isn't infantilized and is treated like a real character here with real flaws that are very apparent in this episode. He pretty blatantly does try to troll Timmy here since obviously he does sense the envy coming off of him and does roast him during his comedy routines. And it's him doing this kind of thing that ultimately leads to the cripple fight within this episode. Weirdly enough, this is actually kind of a good thing to see because it doesn't make him just look like some cuddly pet. He actually does have real flaws like all the other kids in South Park. And also all the other kids treat him like a real person just like they do Timmy. It's just nice to see these two characters on even ground with all the other characters. I think another episode where they really get to shine is called Up the Down Steroid. In this episode, Jimmy is participating in the Special Olympics and he ends up being convinced to take steroids by his classmate Nathan. He's basically sold on the idea that this is his only chance to win the gold medal. At the same time, Cartman has also found out about the Special Olympics and he's discovered that there's a $1,000 cash prize for whoever wins. So, of course, Cartman being Cartman decides to try and pretend to be mentally disabled to enter the Special Olympics and win the cash prize for himself. Oh boy. But, of course, this hilariously backfires because Cartman is so out of shape and ill-equipped that he can't even beat all these disabled kids in the different events. He ends up coming in last place and just gets a $50 gift certificate to Shakey's, which is really funny. And of course, in this episode, they also take direct shots at different MLB players that were pretty notable for taking steroids around this time, like Mark McGwire and a few others.
But I know now that even if you do win on steroids, you're really not a winner. You're just a You're just a big, fat and if you take steroids, the only decent thing to do is come forward and say, remove me from the record books, because I am a big, stinky, steroid-taking jackass.
Inevitably, Jimmy ends up finding out that Cartman faked being disabled in order to enter the Special Olympics to secure what he saw as an easy win, and he gets pretty upset, but then he realizes the hypocrisy of this. Cartman attempting to cheat in the Special Olympics is really no different than him trying to cheat by using steroids. Even though Jimmy is disabled, he still did make the wrong choice just like Cartman by using a performance enhancer. And it's here he ends up realizing he's really no better than Cartman here, and I think that's kind of interesting. And again, it shows that disabled people can still make bad choices just like anyone else. Once again, it's just really nice to see a portrayal of a disabled person as an actual person, not some perfect angel or whatever. It doesn't come off as some sort of lame inspiration point and just him being a real person. And I think it's this kind of representation that we need a lot more of when it comes to disability in media overall. In a lot of ways, I think you could probably argue that South Park sort of sets the precedent for that with its disabled characters. They're very well written and they're seen as equals by all the other kids here. The last thing I want to bring up here, which probably a lot of you clicked on this video for, is how South Park addresses autism, because this is more of a mixed bag in my opinion. There is one episode in particular that does talk about autism in great detail, that being the episode Asperger's. This episode is definitely interesting because it actually satirizes a lot of the anti-vaxxers that believe that vaccines cause autism, which of course is a very stupid thing. This is a pretty dumb belief that's been circulating for a long time now that's ultimately been disproven multiple times, so it is really worth satirizing here, I would say. Especially because there are unfortunately a lot of people who still do subscribe to this belief, such as Robert De Niro of all people.
There's a lot of information about things that are happening with the CDC, the pharmaceutical companies. There's a lot of things that are not said. I, as a parent of a child who has autism, I'm concerned.
This episode is technically the second part to a two-parter episode where, in the first part, Stan actually turned 10 and began to see the world around him in a more negative light. Now that he's getting older, the things he used to enjoy doing just don't seem as fun to him anymore, and also because of this, his friends don't really want to hang out with him anymore. They find his attitude towards this sort of thing to be just really unbearable to be around. While this is going on, a lot of the teachers at South Park Elementary and a lot of different news organizations are worried about vaccines causing autism, or Asperger's as it's called here since that was the old term, within the different kids that get vaccinated, which of course is silly, but naturally they actually believe this sort of thing.
Did we vaccinate Stan Marsh for the flu last year? We did. Uh-oh. I think he's got Asperger's.
And after seeing that Stan has become very negative with the perception of the world around him, Mr. Mackey decides that he must have Asperger's syndrome. Wow, brilliant deduction there, Mackey. So as a result, Stan ends up getting taken to an institution with other people with Asperger's syndrome and hoping to learn more from them. However, this actually ends up being a big hoax, since apparently all the people at this institution just made up Asperger's syndrome in order to hide their own cult that they're a part of. They're all a part of this Matrix parody where they subscribe to this ridiculous belief that AI or aliens are causing the world around them to not look crappy when it really is. And apparently, according to them, the only way you can enter the fake world or the Matrix is by drinking a lot of whiskey. Yeah, right, sure guys. So I admittedly have mixed feelings on this episode as someone who was previously diagnosed with Asperger's, which is really just lower needs autism. On the one hand, I do appreciate South Park for showing the ridiculousness of people thinking that vaccines cause autism, because it is ridiculous. This is something that's been proven over and over again to be a completely non-existent issue, but people still keep saying it for some reason. So it does make sense for South Park to completely take the piss out of it here and totally make fun of it, because it is stupid. But on the other hand, I am a bit conflicted about how they treat what they call Asperger's here. Of course, they joke around about it just being a non-existent thing that's totally made up, although this was before Asperger's was done away with as a diagnosis in favor of just general autism, so perhaps I can excuse it for that. I am a little disappointed they didn't dive too heavily into what Asperger's or autism really is though in this episode, given they did do a good job with that for Tourette, so I was kind of hoping to see that here as well, but unfortunately that didn't quite happen. Although of course this episode was more focused on Stan undergoing a major character arc, so I kind of understand why they didn't really want to focus on something like that for the majority of the episode. But to be honest, even with this rather underwhelming attempt tackling Asperger's, I will say South Park actually does have one really good autistic coded character. I've seen a few different people online saying they see Craig or Butters as autistic coded, which I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on that in the comments if you're one of those people that thinks that. Personally though, I actually find Kenny to be a very good example of autism coding in the show overall. He's obviously very shy and technically the most quiet of the boys, although this obviously is due to him being muffled for the majority of the time. This is something I've seen a lot of autistic people say they relate to, the sort of non-verbal actions that he does, which I could definitely see for sure. Kenny is still able to make himself understood to his peers despite technically being non-verbal, which I think is really cool. And even though this is something that sets him apart from the other boys, it doesn't really ostracize him at all, and they don't treat him any differently for it. Like, he's still seen as one of the essential members of the South Park quartet here, which is really nice. I think you could argue he's also shown different hyperfixations at times, like during the Game of Thrones trilogy where he was hyperfixating on wanting to be a princess during the boys' game that was meant to be a parody of Game of Thrones, which also resulted in him being Princess of Japan for a while, which was amazing. I feel like to some degree he could also be seen as having autistic riz, like in the episode The Ring where Tammy comes onto him there. And of course in that episode all the boys are shocked that Kenny is dating someone, although unfortunately it doesn't go the way he wants due to the Jonas Brothers making them wear purity rings, although that's another story. But to be honest, it's stuff like this that I can definitely see why Kenny would be considered an autistic coded character by a lot of people. And honestly, I feel like autistic coded characters are really good in any media, since they often allow people on the spectrum to be able to feel seen in a way they probably might not be able to otherwise. Overall, while South Park can be kind of messy when it comes to neurodivergent representation, they're honestly pretty spot on with a lot of it. Especially with their Tourette episode and characters like Jimmy or Timmy, they've actually provided some of the most respectful and insightful disability representation out there. And especially with those two examples, I feel like a lot of other media should really be taking cues from South Park on how to properly portray that. So many shows or movies just tend to infantilize the disabled character rather than actually making them a character like South Park actually does. And it's stuff like that that really makes stuff like the Tourette's episode or characters like Jimmy or Timmy actually memorable. And I really do hope in the future that we'll see more media that takes cues from South Park on how to properly do disability representation. But what do you think? Am I wrong? Do Jimmy and Timmy actually suck? Is the Tourette's episode actually bad? Let me know down below. But regardless, thank you so much for watching this video, and I hope you enjoyed it or learned something new from it. If you did like this video, be sure to give it a like, and also consider subscribing since I make a lot of videos like this overall. I make plenty of videos covering film and animation related topics like this in general, so if you like this video, you'll probably like the other videos I have planned as well. If there there's a particular topic you think I should cover here on YouTube, be sure to leave a comment down below, or consider joining my Discord where we have a suggestions and questions channel for you to reach out to me directly. You can also check out my letterbox, which is linked down below, where I review movies and shows, sometimes movies and shows that I won't review here directly on YouTube. You can also find all my social media down there as well. I'm on Instagram, Twitter, Blue Sky, all the things. Special thanks to my patrons and YouTube members also, DDC1996, Trayvon Gibson, Balf Games, You the Guardian, David Deister, and Jared the Rabbit as well for pitching in over there. I appreciate you guys for pitching in for extra monetary support, and I appreciate you for coming to the end of this video. Hope you enjoyed it. Thank you very much for watching. I've been Otterly Noah, and I'll see you on the other side. Bye!